than our good friend, Sarah Jones from Politicus USA. Good morning, Sarah, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me in this crazy time.
In this crazy time. Yes, it is. I'm so glad you were able to join us this morning, and as part of our regular conversation with you and part of our regular opportunity to talk about the things that are in front of us and to talk about the things that are concerns by many of us. Hopefully more people are catching on and more people are getting back involved. I was saying in the previous segment, one of my big concerns right now is the fact that so many people have been unplugged. And I think that the numbers of people that didn't vote is more, in many ways, more concerning to me in terms of the effort that Democratic folks have to put in going forward. I think has to be to get those people who sat on the sidelines back in the game. And last May, and you may know about this or have heard him talk about this, Bakari Sellers was here in Chicago, and he talked about the fact that there were three choices at the time: Trump, Biden, or the couch. And that I think if you look at the percentages of folks that didn't vote, even though VP Harris became the nominee, that the couch won, people that didn't participate. So I've been saying that a lot of our opportunity is to get people back in the fight that did not participate in this last election on a national level. And I'm curious what your thoughts are there. I know we're going to talk about a couple other things, but I'm curious what your thoughts are there in terms of getting people back in the fight.
I noticed that in the election, and it was very concerning to me. We saw this rise, and we still have it, of right-wing content creators that were really dominating spaces outside of politics, where people, especially younger people, are more tuned in usually, like pop culture and sports. Like if you look at the broader conversations, they were dominated by these, I would say, like right-coded content creators. And often we will hear from the Democratic base even, and from media people, that the Democrats need to work on their messaging. And I think Democrats are a little weak on messaging. That has never been their strong point. But the other topic, the other issue, the other side of that is the media hasn't been responsive to their message. And so they have a big roadblock. And I think what has to happen is that everyday people have to start getting involved and get into these other spaces and start trying to have a voice, raise awareness of some issues through those other avenues to reach out to people. Although I will say that the only upside of Donald Trump's behavior in the last 100 days is that he has raised awareness of how important it is to pay attention to who you're electing.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And I read from the Washington Post ABC News poll, and I know that we have to be mindful of polls. I had a couple of people that sent me texts to say, be careful with the polls, because they, depending on how they, and I've always felt this way too, or certainly in recent years, who created the poll, who's it delivered to, and how's it delivered. But the point is, to your referencing Donald Trump's awfulness has probably gotten some people aware that may have shut it off a little bit, even certainly prior to the election, and his approval rating being lower than any other president in their first 100 days, including his first term. That was not astonishing, but it's certainly, I think, that's one of the opportunities that I hope the DNC and the messaging at large doesn't miss, is we seize on these, as I called it last week, his Achilles heels, how he's wrecking the economy by virtue of these tariffs, how one of his staple items, that being immigration and the southern border, how that's certainly not taking having the impact with this awful situation with Mr. Garcia, that we have to take those things, those failures, and highlight them and not wait until we get a year out from the midterms, but it needs to be happening right now. And that's the opportunity that I hope that the Democratic messaging, to your point, doesn't miss, and that people do continue to get involved. And maybe that will be a way for people to say, yeah, I can have an impact. I can have a voice. I can be part of the change that needs to happen.
And you know what I think one other aspect to this is, and I just suspect this based on the people that I've interviewed and spoken to, is that after January 6th, after 1/6, we saw major gaslighting of Americans. And what happened was Donald Trump was not held accountable. And the people that participated in that, although later they were slowly brought through the court system, but if we remember, they were allowed to leave the Capitol building. There weren't arrests that day. And I think that when people see such disparity and they are gaslit and they are told basically that there are people, certain people, privileged people, Donald Trump, will not be held accountable, people begin to disengage because there is no reason to engage. It's very frustrating. It feels like just turn away from that and go do something else. And I think that we saw a lot of Democrats stop paying attention to politics in the aftermath of that. And it wasn't immediate, but it's something that slowly started to erode in the years after that. And I do think the Democratic Party doesn't understand that. But I also think the failure there was our institutions, not the Democratic Party. And I do think that all of these people together, this sort of elite bubble that they can operate in, they may not understand the messages they're sending to everyday people.
Yeah, I mean, if we do point a finger, and it's not point a finger just to do it for the sake of it, I don't think that, and I've said this before, Sarah, and many people have heard me say this, I think that Merrick Garland, from a purely head of that part of the machine, wasn't the right choice. And sometimes I wish that our Democratic leaders would be willing to say, you know what, course correction right now. And that President Biden, and I said this along the way, as many others did, I'm not the only one, I wish he would have been able to say, you know what, we've got a bigger issue than the imagery or the way of doing things in the past, and I've got to replace him with someone else, meaning Merrick Garland. Yeah. I believe that was one of those moves that President Biden should have made, certainly could have made. But what's the word? I'm losing the decorum, not so much, but this is how we've done it, should have been kicked aside, because you're right. Had Americans, both Democratic, Republican, and Independent, seeing that the Justice Department was going to go after Donald Trump in the manner in which it should have, for the right reasons, then that would have allowed people who may have tuned out to say, okay, our system is working. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's exactly. I've been actually saying that about Merrick Garland from the beginning, and isn't because I don't like him. I actually thought he would have been perfect on the Supreme Court. He has that kind of temperament. That is not the temperament that we needed after 1/6. We needed somebody that was going to go in there and say, and that's part of it. This has really been the only criticism that I really had about Joe Biden's presidency, is that because after Trump, he wanted to reinforce institutions, and that's a way that you fight off autocracy and you fight off encroaching fascism. So I understood why he wanted to do that. And to him, that was that we would have Merrick Garland as AG and everything would happen really slowly so it wasn't politicized. But I live in this Trump district, and I spoke to Trump voters after 1/6, and they were really horrified by it. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened is after those people weren't arrested and after the gaslighting began and the alternative reality began, so did their minds change. And they began to think that nothing bad happened that day and it was all a lie. And that actually there were false flag actors there. It was Democrats there, not Republicans, not Trump supporters. And so when there is that failure, that's what happens, right? They get to set this narrative. And I do want to bring up two things that just happened this week about the media, because that's also where this stuff can come from. If they don't set this strong narrative that this is the truth, this is reality, we have to have shared reality if we are going to have elections, if we're going to have if we're going to have a democracy, we actually have to have shared realities. Just this week, 2 Scotland Yard detectives who were investigating the Murdoch tabloids said that the new evidence that was brought forth means they would have considered the man who is now chief executive and publisher of the Washington Post, Will Lewis, to be a criminal suspect in covering up wrongdoing. Now, they knew about that. Those accusations have been around before they gave him that job. And I just wonder, why would you put that person in charge of one of the nation's leading papers before an election when one of the people running is an autocrat.
Yeah.
That's troubling. And then also, just to buttress this point, Bill Owens resigned from 60 Minutes on Tuesday.
Yep.
Because of Paramount having kind of oversight into their stories and supervising the content in new ways. And he felt that he lost independence that he needed for honest journalism. And I think if people see like all that erosion coming from places, these pillars of our democracy that we used to be able to count on, and that's all, they make those choices. They can say Donald Trump threatened us or whatever. You know what? No, you made a choice because of your merger to appease this man. And then there should be shame with those choices.
Scott Pelley did it at the end of 60 Minutes last night, spoke to that in terms of that resignation and how it is, there are people who are standing up. However, there's not enough that are standing up to the autocracy from the White House, both in journalism and in business. And I said last week, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, 2 points, Sarah. One, that universities, this sort of mutual collective that the Big Ten, as an example, are coming together to defend each other from these potential suits, these potential attacks. We saw that Harvard is suing the Trump administration. And I think it's Garber. Is it Andy Garber that's now gathered himself and says, no, we're not going to bend the knee. But the Big Ten and other conferences are starting to look at this and saying that the mutual energy that they have, the mutual strength, the dollars that they have, the influence means something. And by coming together rather than being out there on an island by themselves, they have a better chance at fending off. I feel the same way about many businesses. Big, medium, and small businesses. Why is it that small businesses are the ones that are, in some states now through their AGs, suing the Trump administration? More big businesses should be as well. I believe that collective energy, that collective mindset is powerful if wielded properly. But to sit back and to your point, not go forward when these organizations, and unfortunately, like I said, the Big Ten is taking a step in that direction. But what are your thoughts about that collective energy?
That is where there is power. And I share your disappointment, and I'm really actually disgusted with a lot of big business. And personally, I have decided to not spend my money there I'm going out of my way to just, I know it's not going to change anything, but it's something that I feel I have to live up to my values. And I simply cannot give these people my money while they are bending the knee, and actually not even just bending the knee, but they're benefiting from a system that is meant to hurt everybody else. And I think the caller that was on with you right before I came on, her story speaks to that. Like when I see the people that are being hurt by this administration, and then I look at these corporate entities who have so many privileges, they take advantage of our infrastructure that is paid for by the taxpayers. They don't pay their fair share of taxes. And it's never enough. It's never enough for them. And what's interesting, and you brought up the universities, even far-right Candace Owens, big Trump supporter, has come out and said that what he's doing to universities is wrong, and that when you start silencing free speech, it can happen to anybody. And I see we have this broad coalition that's actually Joe Rogan speaking out against kidnapping people the way that ICE is. And so there's this broad consensus of people speaking out. But again, it's not happening in these institutions. It's interesting you talk about this coalition. Isn't it your Governor Pritzker, who was talking about finding a way to boycott El Salvador if they did not return, or if they keep anyone that Trump sends there? And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if he started a coalition? What if California and New York got involved in that? Then you start to see a lot of power. But we also saw this with the law firms. Like he targeted at least 5 law firms, and some of them sued him in return, but others caved immediately and began doing the stuff that he was asking them to do. And it's actually so appalling. And those are the people, I just feel like, wow, almost feels that they are betraying their obligations as citizens and their responsibility that comes with privilege and power, which is some.
No, Sarah, the reason that has to be part of the conversation right now is because at least in my observation, we all have these sort of connected parts of our lives. We're connected on the economy because we are a consumer-driven economy. I've said that hundreds of times. We make, we spend, hopefully we save, and we invest. So that's a connection that we all should be taking advantage of in terms of pushing the businesses to do more. Because the reality is, if we don't, then those businesses, just like you said, just keep rolling on. Nothing's changed. And Stephanie Rule had a segment a couple of weeks ago that we played in part where she said the silence is deafening from big businesses who are going to be impacted, and are and will continue to be impacted by the misuse of tariffs. And that to me is why I think consumers have to pay attention to this space. Education. We're dotted line, or we're certainly 1 degree of separation from someone that we know that's wanted to get a higher education. So for the universities, I think that's an opportunity for them to reach out to the millions and say, we aren't going to sit back and let this Trump truck just run over us. And so I circle back to where you started on your point on this. I'm so proud of our governor, J.B. Pritzker, here in Illinois, and the leadership that he's taken right out of the gate. It didn't take him 5 weeks to get his footing to say what he wasn't going to stand for here in the state of Illinois. He said it very clearly, full-throatedly early on after the election that you got to come through me. You got to come through my people. We aren't going to stand for what Donald Trump is going to try to bring to the state, but certainly to the country. And he's been very strong in that and very steady in that space. As I say, not perfect, but to your point, Sarah, would it be great if those blue state governors and those blue state AGs, not one-offs, but collectively said, we all are going to be impacted by what this administration is trying to do. And we can't count on the mainstream media to do the right thing, because they're going to continue to gaslight us for ratings and all the rest. And Sarah, you wrote to that this past week. But each of these different entities come together and say, no, we're not going to accept this. We're going to put some brakes on you, Donald Trump, and your administration. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe they think it's too hard to do. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Actually, what you're saying is sparking so much inside of me that I'm like, yes. I think, you know what? If it's too much for them, if they think that's too much, then they're on the wrong job, because this is the job. And that whole kind of cowardice that we are seeing from so many people where I need to go down to Mar-a-Lago and kiss the ring. We've got to find a way to get along. That is just, first of all, no matter how you feel about Donald Trump, that does not work. And so that is a dumb thing to do. You cannot appease an autocrat. It is never going to work. So it is a stupid strategy. All it does is kick the can down the road a little bit. But as soon, like all of these blue state governors, for example, I'm sure they're all thinking about COVID when he was withholding resources from them because of the way their state voted. Well, that's going to happen again. That's who he is. That's what he's going to do. So there is no going down to Mar-a-Lago and speaking to him isn't going to fix that.
No.
And I don't know if you heard Pritzker, but he said that he called for mass protests and disruption. And he said he's never done that before. And he said Republicans cannot know a moment of peace. And one day their portraits will be in museums reserved for tyrants and traitors.
Yeah, Governor Pritzker I'll go out on a limb and say it. I'm very careful in how I position this. I think that he will be a great candidate if he decides to run for president. I think he's filling his strength coffers right now by taking the lead on a lot of these issues. And I'm hoping that continues, because if nothing else, he's putting light on things that need to be lit up. And I want to come back to something that you said a moment ago, Sarah, in terms of going down and kissing the ring, going down to Mar-a-Lago and kissing the ring. Bullies like it when people come to them with weakness. You have to punch a bully squarely in the face. You have to knock that bully, her over, and let them crash into the pool. That's what we have to do. They like it when people yield to them. And we right now don't have the luxury of doing that anymore. And if we don't inspire enough people to punch that bully that's right in their own lives in the face, politically, not literally, they gain space, they gain territory. So we say this, but we mean it for us too, as everyday folks. And I have to compliment you because you do such a great job with your articles and your posts. It's calling out the BS every time the BS comes in front of you. And that's what I think everyday folks have the opportunity and alone the responsibility to do.
I agree completely. That is something that, because people are always asking, what can I do? And the biggest thing I think people can do is to educate other people about the facts about due process and how it's important to everybody, things like that about the economy, but to just keep that in this general space where it isn't politicized. And I actually hate that everyone is saying that, but it is the correct thing to do right now. Although I always want to tell people everything is political. Everything is political, like all of the things, because these same people saying that are people that benefited from civil rights action, from all kinds of previous political action, and from policies and laws that are in right place right now because of politics, because of people who stood up in years prior to us. I just want to say, and I know we're coming to the end of this, I do see the silencing of the judges, this sort of escalation into authoritarianism, and this creating this environment where people will self-center so that Donald Trump can give the impression that he has a mandate, which of course the new polling numbers show he does not. And also when people speak up to him like Pritzker and others, that shows he doesn't have a mandate. And when you punch a bully in the face, you rip off the mask, like it's the mask of Oz, and you see the little man behind that. And that has to happen every single day. And that's something that we can all do when we're talking to friends, our neighbors, people online. We can do some part of that.
And that you were reading my mind, Sarah, because obviously there's so much more to talk about, and we will. But that's what everybody can do. I hope you guys anywhere in the country heard what Sarah just said. We do have to be willing to punch the bully in the face real time on a day-to-day basis when it comes your way, because that the other side of that is being silenced from action, being silenced from your thoughts, frankly. And we can't allow that to be who we are and where we are right now. Sarah, last thoughts, and how can folks, of course, find you and follow you and the great work that you put out every day?
Thank you so much. I am on Substack, and I have a newsletter called The Daily with Sarah Jones, and also separately Politicus USA on Substack now. My thoughts in closing are that we are seeing all of this, really, if you look at it, almost desperate attempt by Trump with the bad economy and the sort of erosion even of his poll numbers on immigration, which was the only issue he was strong on. We're seeing him silence judges and disobeying court orders in response to all of that. And I think what we're seeing with these immigration raids and attacks on people's rights is in part desperation, and it's trying to create a narrative of fear. So what I want to say to everybody is, yes, this is a scary time. We are all afraid, but take a deep breath. They want you to be afraid, and know that this is our country and we have these constitutional rights, and we are all going to stand up together, and we will fight for these rights peacefully.
Absolutely. Sarah Jones, y'all, good to be with you and have you on the show this morning. Sarah, looking forward to talking to you again in a week or so. Meanwhile, keep up the great work, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Thank you so much.
All right.